The golden glow of the evening sun spilled over the grand estate of the Harpers, a sprawling mansion surrounded by manicured gardens, marble fountains, and wide driveways that shimmered like glass. Cars of every luxury brand lined the entrance, sleek black limousines, polished sports cars, and imported sedans, their metallic frames catching the dying light of day. Inside the mansion, laughter echoed. The chandelier blazed above the guests as music floated softly through the air. It was the Harpers' anniversary celebration, and everyone in town who carried even the slightest name or wealth was there. Well, almost everyone. Standing by the corner of the vast living room with her hands quietly folded in front of her was Elena. She wore a simple cream-colored dress. Not silk, not designer. Just cotton, neat, pressed, and modest. No shimmering necklace hung from her throat, no diamond studs on her ears, only a tiny gold chain that had belonged to her late mother. Her shoes were plain, her hair tied back without the help of a stylist, and her makeup was so light it was almost invisible. She looked out of place. And everyone noticed. The other women, draped in gowns worth more than an average man's annual salary, exchanged looks, whispered behind manicured hands, and sometimes didn't even bother hiding their smirks. "Can you believe she showed up like that?" one woman muttered loudly enough for Elena to hear. "I thought the host's wife would at least look presentable," another chuckled, sipping champagne. "Her husband's a nobody anyway. Probably couldn't afford better." Elena lowered her eyes. She wasn't offended easily, but tonight their words cut deeper than usual. She had been invited, after all, it was her husband's circle of acquaintances. She had prepared her best dress, pressed it carefully, even polished her shoes until they shone. Yet here, amid the glitter and the glamour, she was reduced to nothing but an object of ridicule. Still, she held her composure. She reminded herself, dignity isn't in diamonds. It's in how you carry yourself. But the whispers continued, growing sharper with every passing moment. At the far end of the hall, the Harper couple, Mr. and Mrs. Harper, floated like royalty greeting guests. They were tall, elegant, draped in designer clothes. Mr. Harper's gray suit was custom-tailored, and Mrs. Harper's gown sparkled with gemstones. They barely acknowledged Elena except with a thin smile that did not reach their eyes. Elena's husband, Daniel, was not there yet. And that, too, became a source of mockery. One man, his hair slicked back and his Rolex glinting under the lights, leaned toward his group of friends. "Do you see her? Standing there alone? Her husband didn't even bother to come." A woman beside him laughed. Or maybe he was too embarrassed to stand next to her. More laughter followed. Elena kept her back straight, pretending not to hear. But her heart thudded painfully. Where was Daniel? Time crawled. The orchestra played louder as the guests moved toward the long dining table, set with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. Waiters glided about, pouring wine, arranging dishes, and announcing courses. Elena found herself seated near the end, far from the center of attention. The guests around her spared no mercy. One leaned in with mock concern. "So, Elena, is it? Did you buy that dress from a thrift shop?" Another added with a laugh, No, don't be cruel. Maybe it's vintage." The table erupted in laughter. Elena's fingers clenched around her napkin. She wanted to leave. She wanted to run out of the mansion and never look back. But she stayed because Daniel had asked her to attend. He had said, "Trust me. Tonight will be different." But different how? So far, it was a nightmare. The laughter grew when Mr. Harper decided to make a toast. He clinked his glass and the room quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, smiling, "thank you for gracing us with your presence tonight. It means the world to my wife and me. We are surrounded by beauty, elegance, and success." His eyes flicked toward Elena for just a second. A smirk tugged at his lips. "And," he continued, "some of us, well, we remind ourselves that true refinement cannot be bought at a bargain store." The crowd erupted in laughter. Glasses clinked and mocking eyes turned once more toward Elena. Her face burned. The humiliation was unbearable. But she didn't cry. Instead, she looked at the chandelier above, steadying her breath. She whispered to herself, "Daniel, please come soon." And then, a sound. Low at first, then rising. A deep, thunderous hum that rattled the windows and sent ripples through the wine glasses. Thump, 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 thump. The guests paused. The music faltered. Heads turned toward the tall glass doors that opened to the mansion's garden. "What's that noise?" someone asked. "It sounds like—" "No, it can't be." But it was. The unmistakable sound of helicopter blades cutting through the night sky. The guests rushed to the windows, their laughter replaced by gasps. Out in the garden, the flowers bent under the rush of air as a sleek black helicopter descended, its landing lights blazing like twin suns. The ground shook slightly as it touched down on the grass, blades still roaring. Elena's heart leapt. She knew that sound. She knew who was inside. But the others did not. They shielded their faces from the gust of wind, murmuring in shock. Who on earth arrives to a party in a helicopter? Is this some sort of stunt? Which billionaire is it? The Harpers looked stunned. Their smug smiles faded as the helicopter's door swung open. Out stepped Daniel. Tall. Broad-shouldered. His black suit was sharp, his tie perfectly knotted. His hair, dark and neatly combed, glistened under the helicopter's lights. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried a storm. He strode forward, every step radiating power. And the guests who had just mocked his wife fell silent. Daniel walked straight past the Harpers, past the gawking guests, and stopped at Elena's side. Without hesitation, he took her trembling hand into his. "Sorry I'm late," he said softly, only for her ears. "Had to finish something important." Elena's breath caught. Relief, pride, and love swirled in her chest. She squeezed his hand back, unable to speak. But Daniel wasn't done. He turned to face the room, his voice carrying like thunder. "I heard there were comments about my wife tonight." The silence was heavy. No one dared to speak. Daniel's jaw tightened. His voice dropped lower, sharper. "I'll say this once so it's remembered, Elena is my wife. The woman I chose. The woman who holds my heart. And anyone who dares insult her." He let the sentence hang, his eyes sweeping across the crowd like steel blades. "Insults me." A chill swept the room. The same people who had mocked Elena minutes ago now lowered their eyes, their faces pale. No laughter remained. Elena looked up at her husband, her eyes glistening, not with humiliation but with pride. For the first time that evening she felt taller. Stronger. Untouchable. But deep inside she also wondered. Why had Daniel arrived in a helicopter? What had he been doing? Why did his gaze still burn with a hidden fire? Something more was unfolding, something far bigger than the guests could imagine. And tonight was only the beginning. The guests sat frozen in their chairs, as though Daniel's words had struck each of them like a whip. The room, moments ago buzzing with laughter and mockery, now hummed with a heavy, nervous silence. Only the distant whir of the helicopter blades still slowing outside filled the air. Elena, her hand still in Daniel's, could feel the strength in his grip, not harsh but protective, steady. His presence wrapped around her like armor, shielding her from the piercing eyes that moments ago had shredded her dignity. But Daniel was not smiling. His face was carved with tension, his gaze sharp and unflinching. It wasn't just anger at the insults, there was something else. A weight. A storm he was carrying. The Harpers finally forced themselves to move. Mr. Harper plastered on a smile that didn't quite hide the flicker of unease in his eyes. "Well, Daniel," he said, voice overly cheerful, "what a grand entrance. I must say, you've given us quite the spectacle tonight." Mrs. Harper added quickly, "Yes, it's impressive. We're honored, truly." But their words rang hollow, and everyone in the room knew it. Daniel's lips twitched, not into a smile, but something closer to a warning. "I don't make entrances for spectacle," he replied coldly. "I arrive when I'm needed." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. One man tried to lighten the tension with a laugh, but it came out strangled and awkward. Elena looked up at her husband, her mind whirling with questions. She wanted to pull him aside to ask where he had been, why he had chosen to arrive in such dramatic fashion. But she held her tongue. She knew Daniel, he was not a man to reveal his hand too soon. And right now, his silence carried more power than any explanation. The orchestra, unsure whether to continue, let their instruments rest. The room felt heavy as though every breath was borrowed. Then Daniel spoke again. "I didn't come here to join your games," he said, his voice steady but cutting. "I came here for my wife." Gasps rippled across the room. Some of the women who had mocked Elena earlier lowered their heads in shame, unable to meet her eyes. A few of the men looked at one another nervously, as if silently blaming each other for having spoken too loudly. But not everyone bowed. From the far end of the table a voice rose. Smooth, confident, tinged with amusement. "Well, well. Daniel Gray. Still the man of surprises." The crowd parted as a tall man stood. He wore a white suit immaculately pressed and a smirk that oozed arrogance. His dark hair gleamed under the chandelier, and his eyes, sharp and calculating, fixed on Daniel like a predator spotting prey. Elena's chest tightened. She recognized him instantly. Victor Hale. The name alone carried weight. A wealthy businessman, feared in boardrooms, whispered about in back channels of politics. He was charming when he wanted to be, but ruthless when crossed. And he had history with Daniel. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Victor." Victor spread his arms dramatically, as if welcoming an old friend. "What brings you here, Daniel? Surely not just to defend your wife from a little harmless chatter." His smirk deepened. "Or perhaps you've finally decided to face me." The guests gasped. Whispers erupted. Face him? What did he mean? Elena's pulse quickened. What was Victor talking about? Daniel's jaw clenched. For the first time that night, Elena felt the tension radiating off him like heat. He had been composed until now, but Victor's presence stirred something deeper, a rivalry, perhaps even enmity, that the others couldn't comprehend. Victor strolled closer, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He stopped just a few steps away from Daniel and Elena, his eyes flicking to her briefly before settling back on Daniel. "She's beautiful," Victor said smoothly, though the compliment was laced with mockery. "Too beautiful to be left standing alone in a room of jackals. I almost felt sorry for her." Elena stiffened. She wanted to speak to defend herself, but Daniel's hand tightened around hers, a silent message. "Let me handle this." Victor tilted his head. "But tell me, Daniel, why arrive in a helicopter? Trying to prove something? Or is there more behind your sudden dramatic entrance?" The guests leaned forward, hungry for answers. Daniel's voice was calm, but beneath it a quiet steel. "Where I come from, Victor, a helicopter is not drama. It's necessity." Victor's smirk faltered for a split second, and Elena caught it. A tiny crack in his confidence. Necessity? What had Daniel been doing before arriving here? The Harpers, desperate to regain control of the evening, quickly intervened. Now, Mr. Harper said with a forced laugh, "this is a party. Let's not turn it into whatever this is." But the damage was done. The guests no longer cared about the food, the music, or even the Harpers' anniversary. All eyes were on Daniel, Elena, and Victor. And beneath the glittering lights of the mansion, something dangerous was unfolding. Elena's mind raced. She had married Daniel because he was kind, loyal, and quietly ambitious. But she had always sensed there was more to him, layers he never revealed. His work, his connections, his secrets. She had chosen not to pry, trusting him completely. But tonight, as she stood by his side in a room full of enemies disguised as guests, she realized her husband was not just a man who loved her. He was a man with power. A man with enemies. And she was now caught in the middle of something far bigger than herself. Victor leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to make the room strain to hear. "You can shield her tonight, Daniel. But you can't shield her forever. One day the world you walk in will touch her too. And when it does..." He let the threat hang, his smirk returning. Elena's stomach dropped. She wanted to step back, but Daniel's hand anchored her, unshakable. Daniel's reply was quiet but deadly. "Try it, Victor. And see what happens." The air grew colder. The tension thicker. The guests, caught between fear and fascination, held their breaths. And then, suddenly, boom. The lights flickered. The chandeliers trembled. Somewhere outside, a small explosion rattled the air. Guests screamed, clutching their glasses, stumbling back from the windows. The sound of running footsteps echoed from the garden. Voices shouted, urgent and panicked. Daniel's head snapped toward the doors. His eyes sharpened with instant recognition. He knew exactly what that sound meant. "Elena," he whispered urgently, pulling her closer. "Stay with me." Her heart pounded. "Daniel, what's happening?" But before he could answer, the doors burst open. A guard stumbled in, his face pale, his uniform torn. "Sir," he gasped, eyes darting toward Daniel. "They've found us." The room erupted in chaos. The mansion shook as the explosion's echo faded. Glass rattled in its frames, and terrified guests scrambled away from the windows. Screams filled the grand hall as panic swallowed the once glittering celebration. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She clutched Daniel's arm tightly, her heart racing. The guard who had stumbled and collapsed to one knee, gasping for breath. "So they're armed." "Heavily. They've surrounded the estate." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some guests began to cry, others demanded answers, and the Harpers clung to each other, their false grandeur replaced with raw fear. Elena's voice trembled. "Daniel, who are they?" Daniel's eyes were sharp, calculating, but when they met hers, they softened just enough. "Enemies I hoped would never touch you. But it seems tonight they chose to." Victor Hale chuckled darkly from across the room. Unlike the others, he didn't look frightened, he looked entertained. "Ah, so the wolves have finally arrived. Tell me, Daniel, will you fight them or surrender?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "Neither." Another boom shook the ground. The helicopter outside remained still, its blades now silent, but it gleamed like a beacon under the night sky. Armed men in black moved in the shadows of the gardens, their weapons glinting under the moonlight. The guests pressed themselves against the far walls, trembling, watching Daniel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos, "you are safe here. As long as you stay inside. Do not leave this hall." The Harpers tried to protest. "You can't order us around, this is our..." But Daniel cut them off with a single look. His voice dropped, steel in every word. "You'll do as I say if you want to live." The room fell silent. No one dared argue. Elena tugged at his sleeve. Her voice was low, urgent. "Daniel, tell me the truth. Who are you really?" For a moment he hesitated. She saw it in his eyes, the conflict, the urge to protect her from the reality of who he was. But there was no time for half-truths anymore. "I was never just a businessman," he said finally. "Before you, I lived in shadows. Missions. Operations no one speaks of. I walked away when I found you, Elena. I built a different life. But men like Victor and the ones outside, they don't forget. They don't forgive." Elena's chest tightened. The man she had married, the man who had cooked her dinner, who had held her hand through storms, who had loved her so quietly, was also a man the world feared. And now that world had come crashing into hers. Victor's smirk widened. "Well, well. The infamous Daniel Gray reveals himself. I wondered how long you could keep playing house." Daniel ignored him. His focus was on Elena. He cupped her face gently, even as chaos thundered around them. "I promised I'd protect you," he whispered. "That hasn't changed. Tonight it ends." Taz pricked her eyes, but she nodded. "Then I'll stand with you. Whatever happens." His lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind only she ever saw. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the hall burst open. Armed men stormed inside, masks covering their faces, rifles raised. Screams erupted as guests ducked behind chairs and tables. But Daniel didn't flinch. In one swift motion, he pulled Elena behind him and drew a weapon from inside his jacket, a sleek black pistol, its surface gleaming under the chandelier's light. The intruders froze for a heartbeat when they saw him. Then one of them hissed, "It's him!" Daniel fired. The first man dropped instantly. Chaos exploded as the others opened fire, bullets shattering glass and splintering wood. Guests screamed louder, cowering under tables. Elena pressed her hands over her ears, but her eyes never left Daniel. He moved with a precision she had never seen, swift, exact, unyielding. Every shot he fired was deliberate, every motion shielded her. Within minutes, the hall was littered with broken glass, overturned chairs, and the groans of defeated intruders. Silence fell again. Victor clapped slowly, his smirk unbroken. "Impressive, Daniel. Always the soldier. But you can't fight shadows forever. More will come. They always do." Daniel turned his weapon toward him. "Then I'll keep fighting until none are left." Victor's smirk faltered for the first time. He raised his hands in mock surrender, but his eyes burned with hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Not by a long shot." Daniel's gaze hardened. "For you, it is." But before he could act, Victor slipped backward into the crowd, vanishing through a side door in the chaos. Daniel cursed under his breath but didn't chase. His priority was Elena. He turned back to her, lowering his weapon. His hands trembled, not from fear but from the weight of everything he had just revealed. "Elena." She stepped forward, her hand gently resting on his chest. His heart pounded beneath her palm. "You don't have to explain everything," she whispered. "All I need to know is that you chose me. That you'll always choose me." His throat tightened. "Always." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. His reinforcements, were arriving. The danger was not gone, but for tonight the storm had passed. Inside the shattered mansion, the same guests who had mocked Elena now looked at her with wide, fearful, awed eyes. No one dared whisper, no one dared laugh. She was no longer the simple woman. She was the woman Daniel Gray had crossed worlds for. The woman who stood tall beside him when the night fell into fire. As the helicopter's blades roared to life again, Daniel led Elena toward it, his hand never leaving hers. Behind them, the Harpers stood speechless in the wreckage of their perfect party, while whispers followed Elena's every step, not of mockery but of reverence. And as the helicopter lifted into the star-streaked sky, Elena looked out the window, her reflection shimmering against the night. She was no longer the woman mocked for her simplicity. She was the woman whose strength had been revealed in the fire, whose love had steadied a man the world feared, and whose dignity no one would dare question again. Because in the end, it wasn't the diamonds, the gowns, or the chandeliers that mattered. It was the truth, the loyalty, the love. And in that, Elena was richer than them all. Sparkles the end.